Hello, everybody. Welcome to our monthly webinar for October. This is a very timely webinar because we've been having this topic, this theme, for months now with our clients. So this is for the research clinics that are out there. This is very much research clinic focused webinar. Although I'm sure CRAs or other research professionals may learn a thing or two here. But really, it's just shows you some of the challenges that are not often talked about on webinars or just anywhere in this industry when it comes to not just finding studies, but how to take care of some of the more, I guess, subjective intricacies of running a clinical research business, which in this case is nurturing your physician. And even if they're not research naive, but the problem or the challenge is magnified even more so when they are research naive, because you're introducing a whole new world to someone who has no idea what it is, and they're trusting you in some respect. The physicians are, that you know what you're doing, number one, and that they're going to benefit from doing it, which is doing a study with you. So this is the webinar topic for today. As always, if you called in, there's nothing you can do as far as sending questions. You can listen, and then the slides, the replay of this webinar will be emailed to everybody who registered, so you will all get it. It's also going to go on YouTube later today, and it's also going to go on the podcast today. If you logged in with your computer and typed in, you can actually submit your questions through the chat. Okay, so we'll be monitoring the chat, and let's get into the slides. Okay, how do we go next? Here we go. Chris is here too. Chris, how's it going? You're busy texting away over there.
Being bombarded with texts from a certain doctor.
Yeah, I know who. He seems like he communicates in batches.
Yes, he definitely does do that.
There's a lot of radio silence, and then there's a batch. Okay, yes. So again, slides unseen, created by Amy.
Unseen, that's the way we like it.
She hasn't let me down yet. It's important to keep a PI interested. So there's a first, second, and third, okay? Initially, when selling them on conducting research, you are a salesperson. It's even written in there, selling. In the interim, before you get the first study, and then during the study, once the site is enrolling, okay? So when you're first convincing a doctor to work with you, you're upselling. When they agreed, you are now lowering expectations, like Chris Sauber likes to put it. Yep. Can you explain that?
Well, you first have to build up research, right, with the first part when you're selling it to them.
And we've done webinars on that.
Absolutely. And nobody's going to take on a new task if it's not something of interest to them, right? So you have to build interest. Then, once you have them interested, that you have a commitment, they have to be aware of the pitfalls, right? You don't usually like to throw in pitfalls when you're trying to sell somebody on something. But once you have a commitment, then you can throw in the pitfalls. And those are things like it takes time to get a study. It takes time to generate revenue. And so you just have to make sure that they're aware of the timing in regards to research, so they don't lose interest. And then thirdly, the third aspect here, I think, is relatively easy to maintain, because once they start seeing patients, the physicians acting as PI, once they start seeing patients, they're generating revenue. They may have not received it. So you just have to let them know that, a check should be coming anytime, whenever it may be coming, dependent upon the contract. Contracts usually say quarterly, but every once in a while you'll have a contract that is 6 months. You just need to make sure the PI is aware of this. But yeah, once they're seeing patients for the studies, that should be relatively easy to keep them interested there. I mean, they're creating revenue.
Good. Well said, Chris. Next slide. And again, chat your questions if you have any. If not, you will get the webinar replay emailed to you, even if you're called in, and you can reply with any question you have. Maybe something's not clear, or you just have other questions that you want to address, that you want us to address. So, getting a PI interested in research. When presenting the proposition of conducting clinical research, emphasize the main selling points. Okay, and Chris kind of went over some of them. We've gone over some of them in other webinars before, but essentially, the work for the PI is limited. That's why we have study coordinators. That's why we have research staff, so that the PI does not do all the work.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, what percentage of the work in a given trial do you think a PI actually does?
Well, I think it depends on the design of the trial.
Right. There's a range.
Sure. It's probably somewhere between 2% and close to 100%. Well, not 100%, but close to probably 80%.
And what in the higher range, what would they be doing?
Something like a surgery trial, if they're the surgeon on the trial.
Okay.
If they're truly involved.
But even then, I would put the ceiling at around 50. Because
50?
that's just an assessment, even if it's something like surgery.
Well, what if it's just 2 visits, right? The surgery, or the screening and the surgery.
Yeah, but you're forgetting all the regulatory.
Sure.
All the regulatory maintenance,
data entry,
all the startup, data
queries.
entry, query resolutions, protocol deviations.
80% might be a little high, but
Yeah.
they're doing most of the work on the trial.
Remember, we're trying to sell them here. We don't want to tell them you're going to do up to 80% of the work.
Well, that's typically not the case, except for very specific trials.
Right. So typically, it's on the much lower end of that spectrum. I would say the ceiling for an average study and an average PI is 10% of the actual work.
That was the exact number I was thinking. I would agree.
I think that's the ceiling. I think it can be a lot lower than that, too. We've seen it a lot lower.
Outside a specific study, like surgery, right?
Right. But we're not talking exceptions here. We would be on a webinar all day.
Sure.
For that.
Sure.
Okay. So, limited work, that's a selling point. Easy source of revenue. And excellent pay per hour. These budgets are, for the most part, and we've done webinars on this too, these study budgets are very good and worth the time for the PIs, especially if you know what you're doing. You know what you're doing when it comes to negotiating budgets. So if you don't, check out our previous webinars or email us, because we can help you with that as well through our client services, which we'll get into at the end. So once your PI agreed to come on board, it's important to keep them engaged, okay? Now we need to keep the PI interested in your site and keep them motivated. Initially, the PI will be extremely excited, but may lose interest as time goes on. We see this literally, not some of the time, all the time, right? The PIs lose interest if they don't see, especially if they're research naive. Let's say Chris Sauber, let's say I'm a physician, and Chris approaches me in October about doing studies.
And I get you juiced up for doing research.
Yeah, you get me all pumped up. I'm ready to go. I have patience. I know my time will be limited, and the pay is disproportionate to what I'm actually doing. Like, I like all this. I love it.
Absolutely.
Okay? That's in October. November comes around, 4 weeks later.
And you have no experience in research.
I have zero experience in research as a physician.
Outside of what I've told you, that's pretty much all you know.
Yes. 4 weeks later, I still have no study. I have no communication from Chris. Okay, maybe I'm definitely not as excited as I was in October, but I haven't given up on it. December comes around. Still no activity. I might have forgotten who Chris even is.
Most likely have, though I'm very memorable.
Certainly after the holidays and after the new year, I definitely forget who you are. If we don't have something.
Most likely, yeah.
I need to see a study. I need to see a feasibility survey. I at least need to hear from you on a regular basis. And that's where many site owners and directors drop the ball.
Sure.
Because we talked about it before. It takes time to get a study, especially for a research naive PI. It takes a good 3 months to get that first site selection visit.
Maybe longer.
You don't want the PI to give up before that happens, or even worse, you schedule a site selection visit and the PI doesn't want to do it anymore, right?
Yeah.
Because they think that you already made money off of them. I mean, or that you just forgot about them.
Yeah, who knows what they're thinking, but yeah, they've completely lost interest, and we've seen this happen.
We've seen this happen a lot.
Well, I mean, specifically, last thing you said, in which site selection visit gets scheduled and the PI is no longer interested.
Yeah. Or even worse, the PI gets passive aggressive and during the site selection visit says, "No, I don't have much experience and I don't think we can do this."
Right.
So you have to communicate, over communicate with your PI. That's my strategy. There's probably more strategies here. Like Chris, I don't know what you do, but I just over communicate. It's nothing sophisticated. I talk a lot. I at least let them know that I'm doing work. Sure. I haven't forgotten about you. You are important to me. Getting a study for you is priority number one for me right now. It takes time, and here's what I'm currently doing. Here's the emails I've been sending. I mean, I don't know if your PI wants to see all that, but I mean, what have you done to keep them engaged?
Well, the funny thing is with any new PI that we've brought on, outside of one, we've been able to get studies for relatively quickly. But yeah, outside of that, you do need to have communication, which we do, right? If it's not you, it's me. And it can be just as, like you said, as simple as sending an email stating that still working on finding you a trial, and hopefully you've had some results, even if very limited. You can update the PI with that. I've signed CDAs for this trial and this trial. Have yet to receive a feasibility questionnaire. And these serve two purposes. If you're working with a research-naive physician, then that will open the door for questions from them. What's a feasibility questionnaire? What's a CDA, maybe even? So you can educate them too. So
Use a very good point. Use this as an educational opportunity. Every point of contact that you have with your PI should be an educational opportunity for them, especially when they're research naive. And even if they're not, you're probably way more deep in the trenches than they ever will be, and it's good for them to kind of see what you're doing. That way there's no resentment later on when the money does get good and they think that they should get more. I mean, if they don't know what you're doing, you kind of can't fault them for thinking they deserve more when everyone they ever talk to tells them that they are responsible for 100% of the conduct of the trial. So it's your job to communicate the nuances and the finer points of what you do to ensure that they understand all this. Okay. So explain, this is exactly what you said, explain to your PI that there will be no work for them until your site finds a study, and that you will be in the process of getting a sponsor interested in working with you. Now, there's no work for them. There's tons of work for you. So you want to emphasize that you are working.
Yep.
When you get a feasibility survey, that's the first time, if it's their first study, that this PI will actually be required to do some work, meaning helping you do the feasibility survey for that particular study. So, and that could be something as simple as going through the patient database and seeing what the numbers are for that particular indication for this study. The next thing you want to do is lower expectations of how quickly it will take to get started. So again, when you're dealing with non-research physicians, they are used to seeing a patient in their private practice or seeing a patient in an inpatient facility and then billing for it, billing insurance, and within 30 days, 60 days, sometimes 90 days, they'll get paid. It's very linear. It's very simple to understand how they get paid. In research, it's very different. There's a lot of variables. How quickly can we get the study? How do we do at the site selection visit? How many patients can we enroll? How many deviations are we having? How many queries are there? All these variables affect speed of payment, quantity of payment, if any, It's very different from what they're accustomed to if they're in the private practice setting. So now you want to lower the expectations, okay? It takes time to get studies. It takes time once you have a study to get initiated to the site initiation visit. Then it takes time to enroll these patients. And then we actually have to manage the operations, and then we get paid once a monitor comes through and reviews the data. Usually, that's how payments are triggered. So set a timeline for each study. Let them know that it will usually take around 3 months to get a SSV, which is a site selection visit, and follow up in 3 months if there still is no study. I would follow up every week if this is a concern for you, which it should be. Even if you don't know it, it's a concern. Okay. In the meantime, ask your PI to provide you with an updated CV. We had this happen with one of our sites, Chris. We have a new PI. He was added as a sub-I for some university. He had like a dozen studies. This happened this weekend. He had a dozen studies that he was a sub-I for.
That he was unaware of?
No, he was aware of, but he only let us know later, hey, I actually have all these studies, but they're not on the CV I gave you.
Right.
So we had to modify his CV, add them all there. I had to have Kobe edit it, because Kobe's really good at converting PDF to Word and making it look nice. And then now he has like 15 studies on his CV. And guess what? That helps us get studies.
Sure, absolutely.
It's 15 studies on your resume is a lot better than 1 or 2.
Without a doubt.
But if it wasn't for weekly communications with him, we would not have known that. And this is someone has a vested interest. He's a part owner, the PI.
But I don't remember. I've heard something recently. I don't remember where I heard this from. But sponsors and CROs are becoming more interested in research-naive physicians.
Yeah, you probably heard it from us.
I don't remember where I heard that. It wasn't from you.
They are for the more niche studies. They are.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they want it both ways. These sponsors and CROs want it both ways. They want physicians that have huge private practices that sort of have like 1 foot in research, 1 foot in private practice. But then they don't want to give somebody a study without some kind of research experience. So of course, these kind of things help, right? And include any and all research experience they may have. Ask them repeatedly. Did you do any studies? Are you affiliated with any universities? Are you a sub-investigator in any study? Every bit of experience at this stage helps for a research-naive physician. Get them. This is where I like to get them to do good clinical practice. And it gives them an overview. And this is where they'll actually have to start doing some work, right? Give them a GCP module. How many hours do you think it takes to complete GCP?
I mean, if it's new to you, probably, well, it depends on the site too. Anywhere between an hour and 3 hours.
So this is the first time they'll be actually doing some work. GCP, get them to do it. If they're research naive, they're going to learn a lot about their expectations. Just get them to do it. Even if you have to go to their office and do it with them. Get them to do it.
Sounds like fun.
Sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds like a lot of work to be a site owner. Go figure, right? Continuously follow up, right? So whether or not a study has been secured, make sure to follow up with your PI once every other week or so with an update. Again, I like to do it every week. Could be 5 minutes, 5-minute phone call, even a text, even an email. Hey, I am doing this week. I have done this last week. Okay, let them know what you've been applying for. Ask for their input when completing feasibilities. This will show your PI that there has been some activity and will keep them in the loop.
They won't forget about you this way.
They won't.
No.
You might push them away the other way because you're annoying. But I'd rather have that happen than them thinking you're not doing anything and getting frustrated.
I think you're safe with an email once a week. You're not going to annoy anybody with that. No. I would hope not.
No. And if you do, then that's probably not a good PI for you because when the study gets going, if that's bugging them, imagine monitors requesting 30-minute phone calls with them or in-person visits with them. Right? Keep the PI interested after your site has gotten studies. So once your site has gotten studies and started screening, It is important to communicate with your PI because it often takes up to 3 months after your site starts screening for you to get paid. So this point,
that could be longer, 6 months.
It could be longer. It could be a lot longer because some of these payments are quarterly.
I've seen semi-yearly,
right?
Semi-annually.
We always push for monthly, though.
Yes, but most of them are quarterly. But yeah, I've seen as long as every 6 months.
Aren't most monthly?
Quarterly.
Nowadays, they're quarterly?
Yeah.
But the studies we have at Costa Mesa are all monthly.
Yeah, you request monthly.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. So if you know what you're doing, you can request monthly.
Not that it really matters all that much unless you're desperate on funding.
Cash flow. Cash flow is king.
Yeah, well.
Especially most of our audience are research naive or like just startup clinics.
Yeah.
Of course it matters. Now this is a crucial point in the study because now your PI is actually doing work, reviewing labs, reviewing ECGs, reviewing IE criteria, which is inclusion, exclusion, probably meeting with monitors a few times. Probably are some issues already.
Yep.
They're being hassled, basically. And if they don't see money, they're going to think, why is Chris not paying me?
Why am I working for free?
And then they will think falsely, oh, I get it. Chris is using me so he can make money and drive his Tesla. And I'm not going to get paid. Again, this is where you got to communicate. And I don't know what kind of arrangement you have with your PI, but if you've been listening to us, it's most likely a percentage of your payments as the site gets paid. So you got to let them know, we haven't gotten paid yet. This is the work that we have done so far. These are our receivables. This is where a CTMS can come in handy because you can just give them access to it and walk them through it.
Mm-hmm.
And say, hey, this is what we should be receiving soon. These are the next monitoring visits that usually triggers a payment. We're on monthly payment terms, so we should get this amount by this date. Okay. Now, pharma's notoriously slow in paying sites, so communicate that it could even be longer, but it's there. I've never heard, or I've only heard a few cases of sites not getting paid. And that's usually when the biotech went out of business. Okay. Which sucks for those guys.
Absolutely.
Never happened to us.
It almost did.
Really?
Yeah, we were approached by a company to do a study. And for some reason, we remained on the email chain for that company. And the budget was horrible, so we were selected to do the study. We turned it down because we couldn't get a better budget. Then, maybe 6-9 months after the trial had started, we saw an email that stated it was from somebody within the company higher up, stating, "We're sorry we have been able to unpay you at this point. We're going out of business, essentially. We're filing for bankruptcy." And boy, that email chain got real interesting because all the sites were on it. You don't remember this?
I do now. So the sites were on it by accident.
And we were on it too.
And sites were replying with,
yeah, they can't believe we're not getting paid, and upset, like you would be.
But they didn't get paid.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens. But that's rare. And like I said,
is rare.
For us, it never happened. It just almost happened.
Yeah, thankfully we avoided that study.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so properly communicate payments to the PIs. Even if they don't ask for it, it doesn't mean it's not important to them. Money is important to everybody. No matter how rich, how poor, how cash-strapped they are, everyone wants to be compensated fairly for the work that they're doing. And so even if it's not there, just having that communication sometimes will make all the difference in the world. So in some cases, CRAs can cause the PI to feel uneasy by mentioning that the PI is ultimately responsible for the conduct of the study and that an FDA audit can happen at any time. PIs can get cold feet, especially if they're research naive. Compound that with they haven't gotten paid yet, and their better judgment is saying to themselves, why even do this anymore? This is risky. I can make way more in my private practice. It's short-sighted, but that's how humans are.
Oftentimes.
And guess what? That is no one's fault or responsibility but yours as the site owner. You can't expect the PI to understand this. This is your business. Even if they're a business partner, you're in charge. They've partnered with you so that you can guide them through this. And that's your responsibility. And it's your responsibility to be proactive and not be reactionary and wait to put out fires as opposed to preventing them in the first place. Right? And sometimes you do all you can and that's it. Like, you can't be upset with yourself. But if you can do something to prevent, you should. And this is what this webinar is all about, nurturing your relationship with the PI. So it boils down to communication. Communication is key. The more that you communicate with your PI and keep them in the loop, the more at ease they should feel about the progression of the study. Are there any questions? We will hold the line open for maybe 5 more minutes. Chris, why don't you give them the spiel of what we offer?
The spiel, huh?
Well, we nurture their PIs for them.
Well, I don't know if we'll nurture their PIs for them.
Okay.
Unless the PI is the client themselves.
Right.
We do send a weekly communication out to what we've been doing.
Mm-hmm.
But that would have to be the PI, right?
Well,
That's
explain that part. Explain the weekly communication we do with our clients and how they should, in turn, communicate this with their PIs.
Sure. So if you take us on as your consultants, every week we send out what we've done for that week to whoever the contact is. And it lists what, I believe it lists, I don't handle this, it's one of our employees, but it lists who the contact was, what's the sponsor or CRO, and the indication. And again, that goes out weekly. So essentially, you as a site owner should do the same with your PI maybe, right? Just to show that you're still actively working on bringing them a study.
Right. And we have, we charge $1,000 a month for the biz dev and doing the feasibilities for you, doing the contracts and budgets, which we discussed. It's very important you get monthly payment terms whenever possible. And we also help you communicate better by communicating with you so that you can translate this over to the PI. Anything else? There is a conference that we are planning. If you want some perks, right now is the time to do it. You literally want anything from Chris or myself, barter with me. We have a Kickstarter campaign. There will be a link. I'll put a link in the show notes. Can you get a link of that Kickstarter, Chris, while I'm answering these questions? How do we pull up that link to the Kickstarter? And I'll get to your question right now. There's another question. It should be on any one of my emails. Okay, just copy and paste that and put it in the chat, please. And then we'll get to questions. Here's the link to the Kickstarter. You get all kinds of perks for supporting this conference. But if you don't see something on there that you want, let me know. We'll barter with you. Okay, question. If the site contracts with PI and the site gets the study, not actually brought by the PI, is it possible to subcontract an administrative percentage for the site from the budgeted investigator fee? If yes, how much? Of course, anything's possible. It's whatever you can negotiate with the PI. So if you would have to look at your agreement that you have with the site. If you're not you should be the payee for that study. So if you're contracting with PIs and you get the study, then it is possible to subtract an administrative fee for the site from the budgeted investigator fee. Typically, it could be. It depends what you're doing. If you are just bringing the study, something like 10 to 20% would be fair. If you are doing much more than just bringing the study, but you're also negotiating the contract and budget, managing the regulatory, running the having oversight of the coordinators, basically doing all the work, as much as 80% is fair. So it really depends. And then everything in between, sort of between that range of 10 to 80. for the PI. So it all depends on what you're actually doing. I typically compensate PIs 10 to 20% of their overall study budget, unless they are business partners with me, meaning they actually own the company with me. Then obviously they get a percentage of the profits based on the percentage of their equity. So it makes it a lot simpler. But if you're the sole owner and you're just contracting with PIs, everything matters. The environment matters. What are you doing? What is the situation? Who's paying the bills? Who's doing the work? That's where you can get into what's fair and what's not. Any more questions? Type away. Otherwise, just reply back to the email once you get it. And like I said, I will include a Kickstarter link in the email that I send out. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chris. And we will catch you all later. Bye-bye.